A child found something beautiful. It glowed blue, like magic. 2 weeks later, she was dead. And she wasn't the only one. Because this wasn't an accident. It happened again and again in different countries for the exact same reason. Some machines were never meant to be abandoned.
Everything is connected. Nothing is random.
A child's hand reaches toward light. Not sunlight, not moonlight, something else. Blue, brilliant, beautiful. The kind of light that shouldn't exist in nature. The kind that makes you lean closer. In a backyard in Brazil, a 6-year-old girl eats rice with her fingers. The grains glow faintly in the darkness. She thinks it's magic. Across the ocean, in Thailand, a man wipes sweat from his forehead. His palm leaves a luminescent streak across his skin. He laughs, shows his friends. In Taiwan, a pregnant woman sleeps in her new apartment. The walls are fresh. The paint is perfect. The future feels bright. She doesn't know the concrete itself is screaming. 3 continents, 3 decades, 3 stories that should never intersect. But in the space between beauty and horror, between progress and negligence, between what we can see and what we cannot, there exists a connection so precise, so documented, so verifiable, that once you understand it, you'll never look at abandoned buildings the same way again. You'll never trust the metal beneath your feet. You'll never forget that some poisons wear the face of wonder. The Brazilian girl died first. Her internal organs liquefied over 14 days. The Thai workers followed. Their bone marrow simply stopped. The Taiwanese families? They didn't even know they were dying until their children were born wrong. This is not a story about curses. This is a story about what happens when healing becomes murder, when greed becomes genocide, when a single bureaucratic failure becomes a multi-generational catastrophe. Because somewhere in your city, right now, there might be a building, empty, quiet, forgotten, and inside that building, there might be a room, and inside that room there might be a machine, and inside that machine, these stories were never meant to be connected, but they were. The Scavengers, Goiania, Brazil, September 13, 1987. Roberto Santos Alves doesn't consider himself a thief. A scavenger, yes. A survivor. A man who understands that in a city where the rich build upward and the poor sift through what falls, there's dignity in salvage. He's 38 years old. His hands are scarred from sorting through trash. His back aches from carrying weight. But he knows metal. He knows what sells. And the old Instituto Goiano de Radioterapia, abandoned for 2 years now. Windows shattered, doors hanging loose. That place is full of it. The clinic closed in 1985. Bankruptcy. The kind that happens quietly in Brazil, where medical equipment is expensive and patients are poor. The owners locked the doors and walked away. They took the files. They took the furniture. They left everything else. Roberto and his friend Wagner Mota Pereira pushed through the rusted gate on a Tuesday afternoon. The sun is high. The building smells like mold and pigeon shit. There, Wagner points. In what used to be the radiation therapy room, bolted to a concrete platform sits a machine. Heavy, industrial, the kind of thing that screams value to a man who sells by the kilo. They don't know what it is. They don't care. It takes 4 hours to unbolt it. Another hour to get it onto a wheelbarrow. Wagner's shoulder is screaming by the time they get it back to Roberto's house. But the weight means money. Weight means food. That night, Roberto takes a sledgehammer to the machine's casing. The metal is stubborn, reinforced, the kind of construction that suggests something inside is either very valuable or very dangerous. He assumes valuable. On the 4th strike, the casing cracks. On the 7th, it splits. Inside, there's a cylinder, lead-lined, heavy enough that Roberto can barely lift it. And inside that cylinder, he tilts it toward the light. A gray powder spills onto his palm, and in the fading daylight of his backyard, he sees something impossible. The powder glows, not reflects, not shimmers, glows, blue light. emerging from within the substance itself, like someone trapped a piece of sky inside dust. Roberto calls his wife, his brother, his neighbors. Within 20 minutes, a dozen people are crowding into his yard, passing around handfuls of magic. "It's worth a fortune," someone says. "It's a sign from God," says another. Roberto's 6-year-old niece, Liditas Neves Ferreira, watches the adults laugh and play with the glowing powder. She wants to join. Her father dips his finger in the substance and draws a cross on her forehead. "For luck," he says. She smiles. Within 48 hours, Roberto begins vomiting. His wife develops burns on her hands that look like severe sunburn, except they're not healing. They're getting deeper. Wagner can't keep food down. His gums are bleeding. The neighbors who touch the powder report the same symptoms: dizziness, nausea, lesions appearing on skin that never made contact with anything sharp. On September 18th, 5 days after opening the capsule, Roberto's wife takes a bus across the city to show the glowing powder to her brother, Ivo Ferreira. Ivo runs a junkyard. He takes one look at the substance and sees profit. He scoops several handfuls into a plastic bag and distributes it to employees and family members. His daughter Lide, the 6-year-old girl, plays with it at the dinner table. She rubs it on her skin. She eats rice with unwashed hands that have touched the powder. The glow makes her feel like a princess in a fairy tale. By September 21st, Lida can't stand without help. Her hair is falling out in clumps. Her skin is covered in burns that seem to emerge from inside her body. Ivo finally takes her to the hospital. The doctors diagnose food poisoning. They send her home. On September 28th, 15 days after Roberto first cracked open the capsule, a woman named Maria Gabriela Ferreira, Ivo's wife, makes a connection. The sickness started after her husband brought the glowing powder home. She's not a scientist, she's not educated, but she knows cause and effect. She places the remaining powder, still glowing, still beautiful, into a plastic bag. She carries it on a public bus, sitting with it on her lap for 40 minutes, to the local health surveillance office. She sets it on the receptionist's desk and says, "I think this is killing my family." The receptionist stares at the bag, at the blue glow seeping through the plastic. And for the first time since September 13th, someone with authority begins to understand that something is terribly, scientifically, catastrophically wrong. A physicist is called. He arrives with a Geiger counter. Before he even enters the room, the device begins screaming. When he points it at the bag, the needle slams to the maximum reading and stays there. The substance is cesium-137, radioactive isotope, medical grade. Approximately 1,375 curies of radiation. For context, the bomb dropped on Hiroshima released radiation measured in the millions of curies, but dispersed over a massive area in seconds. This capsule released the equivalent of a localized nuclear event spread over 2 weeks, concentrated in neighborhoods, homes, and human bodies. By October 1987, the Brazilian government declares a radiological emergency. 4 people are dead. More than 249 people are confirmed contaminated. Entire city blocks are evacuated. Homes are demolished. The topsoil from 7 properties is removed and buried in a concrete tomb that will remain sealed for 300 years. Because cesium-137 has a half-life of 30.17 years, which means even now in 2026, that capsule, if it still existed, would still be emitting approximately 40% of its original radiation. Latest Neves Ferreira dies on October 23, 1987. Her body is so radioactive that officials initially refused to bury her in a public cemetery, fearing contamination of groundwater. Her father fights for a proper burial. When she is finally interred, her coffin is sealed in a lead-lined chamber and surrounded by concrete. She is 6 years old. She touched beauty, and beauty killed her. But here's what the news reports didn't emphasize. What the documentaries gloss over. What matters for this investigation. The machine that killed lied, that contaminated 249 people, that turned 7 city blocks into a nuclear exclusion zone, was a medical device, designed to save lives. Left behind in an abandoned clinic because disposing of it properly cost more than walking away. And this wasn't an accident unique to Brazil. It was a pattern that had already killed before, and would kill again. The Invisible Fire. Samut Prakan, Thailand, January 2000. Sotep doesn't know the word radiotherapy. He knows metal. He knows weight. He knows the difference between steel worth 10 baht per kilo and alloys worth 50. He works at a scrapyard outside Bangkok, in Samut Prakan province. The kind of place where industrial waste comes to die. Where shipping containers full of recyclable materials arrive from hospitals, factories, and demolition sites with paperwork that asks no questions. In January 2000, a cylinder arrives. Stainless steel, heavy, approximately 30 centimeters long. The kind of industrial salvage that usually contains copper wiring or precious metal components. Worth opening. Wall the opening. Sotep's boss tells him to cut it. He takes it to the workshop, sets it on the bench, fires up the angle grinder. The blade bites into the steel, sparks fly. The metal resists, but eventually, the casing splits, and something inside, invisible, tasteless, odorless, floods into the air. Sotep finishes the cut, wipes his forehead, feels fine. By evening, he feels tired, assumes it's the heat. By the next morning, he's vomiting. Within 3 days, his skin develops burns that look like severe sunburn. But he hasn't been outside. His gums bleed when he brushes his teeth. His hair is falling out. He goes to a clinic. They diagnose food poisoning. He's sent home with antibiotics. But his wife is sick now too. So is his neighbor, and the other worker who helped move the cylinder. 10 people in total, all living within 200 meters of the scrapyard, all presenting the same symptoms. Doctors are baffled. They test for cholera, dengue, chemical exposure. Nothing matches. It takes 3 weeks for someone to make the connection. A physician at Chulalongkorn Hospital, treating one of the scrapyard workers, notices something unusual about the burns. They're not surface level. They're emerging from inside the tissue, as if the patient is being cooked from within. He asks about chemical exposure. The worker mentions the cylinder. The doctor requests the object be brought in for testing. When the cylinder arrives at the hospital, transported in the back of a pickup truck, handled with bare hands, a radiation safety officer happens to be walking past. He sees the object, sees the markings, sees the lead lining, and he knows. The cylinder contained cobalt-60, another radioactive isotope used in medical radiation therapy. Half-life, 5.27 years. The source had been removed from a hospital radiotherapy machine, legally or otherwise, and sold as scrap metal without proper decommissioning. When Supor cut it open, he released approximately 15.7 curies of gamma radiation directly into the air of a populated area. 3 workers die. 7 others survive with permanent tissue damage, increased cancer risk, and burns that never fully heal. The scrapyard is declared a contamination zone. The soil is excavated. The Thai government launches an investigation into the illegal sale of medical equipment. They find records of at least 6 other radiotherapy machines sold to scrap dealers between 1995 and 2000. Not all of them have been accounted for. One report notes that the cylinder came from a private hospital that closed in 1998. The hospital administrator, when questioned, states that disposal protocols for radioactive materials were expensive and bureaucratically complex. It was cheaper to sell the machine to a salvage company and let them handle it. The salvage company sold it to a smelter. The smelter sold it to a scrapyard. The scrapyard told Suptup to cut it open. In the final report, filed with Thailand's Office of Atoms for Peace, there's a footnote. It mentions that similar incidents had occurred in other countries: Brazil, 1987, Mexico, 1984, and one more, one that wouldn't be fully understood until years later, one that had already killed, silently, for more than a decade. Taipei, Taiwan, 1983. The Chang family moves into their new apartment in March 1983. Modern construction, 7th floor, 2 bedrooms, a view of the city. Mr. Chang works in manufacturing. Mrs. Chang is a nurse. Their daughter May is 8 months old. They are young, optimistic, building a future. The building is part of a construction boom. Taiwan's economy is surging. High-rises are sprouting across Taipei like bamboo after rain. Steel is in demand. Recycled rebar is cheap. No one asks where it comes from. May grows. She learns to walk at 14 months late, but not alarming. She speaks her first word at 20 months. Delayed, but children develop differently. By age 3, she's noticeably shorter than her peers. Her teeth are coming in wrong. She bruises easily. Mrs. Chang, being a nurse, takes her to a pediatrician. The pediatrician notes developmental delays, possible nutritional deficiency, prescribes vitamins, cesium voldigil by sorch, 1 gradadal 2 and guatade and my wensweth kimintalabt, morning sickness that lasts all day, fatigue that feels like drowning. She gives birth to a boy in January 1986. He has a cleft palate. His legs are underdeveloped. He will require multiple surgeries. The doctors say it's genetic. Bad luck. These things happen. Across Taipei, in an apartment building 3 kilometers away, the Lin family is experiencing something similar. Their son, born in 1984, has leukemia at age 4. Their daughter, born in 1986, has severe scoliosis. Mrs. Lin develops thyroid cancer in 1987. The building's residents begin to whisper, "Is there something in the water? The air? A curse?" In 1992, a man named Dr. Wang Wei-li moves into one of these buildings. He's a radiation safety technician, works at a hospital, knows what a Geiger counter does. One evening, for reasons he'll later describe as pure curiosity, he brings his work equipment home. He turns it on. The device immediately begins clicking. Dr. Wang walks through his apartment following the sound. Kitchen, elevated readings. Bedroom, higher. Living room, the needle spikes. He holds the Geiger counter against the wall. The reading is 100 times normal background radiation. He presses it to the floor, 200 times normal. The concrete itself is radioactive. Dr. Wang alerts authorities. Initial response is skepticism. Concrete doesn't just become radioactive, but he's insistent. He provides readings. He demands testing. In January 1993, Taiwan's Atomic Energy Council begins a systematic investigation. They test Dr. Wang's building. Confirmed. Contaminated. They expand the search. By 1994, investigators have identified approximately 180 buildings across Taiwan, primarily in Taipei, but also in Taoyuan and Hsinchu, constructed with radioactive steel. More than 1,600 apartments, an estimated 10,000 people exposed, some for more than a decade. The source is traced back to a single event in December 1982. A steel smelting facility in Taoyuan purchased a large quantity of scrap metal from various sources, including industrial salvage and demolished facilities. Among the scrap, a cobalt-60 source from a radiography device. The source was not removed before the metal was melted. When cobalt-60 is mixed into molten steel, it doesn't disappear. It disperses. The contaminated steel was formed into rebar, reinforcement bars used in concrete construction. That rebar was sold to construction companies. Those companies built apartment buildings. And for more than 10 years, the residents of those buildings lived inside structures that were slowly irradiating them. The health impact takes years to fully document. A study published in 1998 examines the medical records of residents from contaminated buildings. Increased cancer rates, 20 to 30% above baseline. Elevated rates of genetic abnormalities in children, specifically thyroid dysfunction, developmental delays, and skeletal malformations. Higher incidence of leukemia in children under 10. The Chang family's daughter Mei is included in the study, so is the Lin family's son. They were not unlucky. They were poisoned by their own homes. The Taiwanese government offers compensation. Some families accept. Some file lawsuits that drag through courts for years. The buildings are retrofitted or demolished. The contaminated steel is removed and stored in shielded facilities. But the damage, genetic, cellular, generational, cannot be unbuilt. In the final investigative report, there's a section labeled Origin of Contamination. It traces the cobalt-60 source to a private medical clinic that closed in 1981. The clinic's radiotherapy equipment was sold to a salvage company. The salvage company sold it to a smelter. The smelter melted it down, and the metal became invisible. 3 words appear repeatedly in the report: lack of oversight, economic incentives, systemic failure, not malice, not evil. Just cost-benefit analysis where human lives were the acceptable cost. The global map of invisible wounds. The official term is orphan source. It refers to radioactive material that is no longer under proper regulatory control. Lost, abandoned, stolen, forgotten. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, there have been more than 2,700 documented incidents involving orphan sources since 1993. Most never make international news. Most kill fewer than 5 people. Most are discovered only after someone opens something they shouldn't. In Mexico, 1983, a truck carrying a cobalt-60 teletherapy unit is stolen. The thieves, unaware of the contents, open the shielding. The unit is later found in a junkyard. 5 workers die. The contaminated metal is traced to dinner tables and fences across the region. In Algeria, 1978, a lost iridium-192 source used in industrial radiography is found by a worker who carries it in his pocket for hours. He dies within days. His family, who handled his clothing, develop radiation burns. In Estonia, 1994, 3 men find a metal container in a forest. Inside, cesium-137. They bring it home. Within a week, 1 is dead. 2 are hospitalized with acute radiation syndrome. Each case follows the same pattern. 1 medical or industrial equipment containing a radioactive source. 2 that economic incentive to dispose improperly. Cost of legal disposal versus cost of abandonment or illegal sale. 3 that scavengers, scrap workers or civilians discovering the source. 4 attraction to the object, weight, value, or in the case of cesium-137, literal beauty. Delayed recognition of danger, because radiation is invisible. 6 deaths that cluster in families and communities. But Goiania, Thailand, and Taiwan aren't just 3 incidents. They are 3 documented incidents. The question investigators began asking in the late 1990s was, how many undocumented incidents exist? How many orphan sources are still out there, sitting in abandoned buildings, buried in landfills, melted into metal that's already been incorporated into bridges, cars, surgical tools? In 2003, the IAEA launches the Code of Conduct on the Safety and Security of Radioactive Sources. It's voluntary, non-binding, essentially a suggestion that countries maybe try to keep track of their radioactive materials. As of 2025, compliance is inconsistent, enforcement is minimal, the economic incentive to cut corners remains. A 2019 study estimates that there are between 10,000 and 30,000 disused radioactive sources worldwide that are not properly secured, some in hospitals that closed decades ago, some in industrial facilities that were never audited, some in private clinics in countries where regulation is loose and corruption is standard. Given the decay rates of isotopes such as cesium-137, half-life 30.17 years, materials from devices manufactured in the 1960s, 1980s remain hazardous and will continue to pose risks until approximately 2180, 200 more years. 200 years of invisible landmines scattered across every continent, waiting for someone to dig in the wrong place. And the connection, the thread that ties Goiania to Bangkok to Taipei, isn't geography, it's not politics, it's not even technology, it's human behavior. Specifically, the predictable, documentable human response to economic pressure when safety is expensive and human lives are distant abstractions on a balance sheet. In Goiania, the clinic owners chose bankruptcy over the $50,000 cost of properly decommissioning their radiotherapy machine. In Thailand, hospital administrators chose liquidation over the regulatory burden of reporting radioactive inventory. In Taiwan, a smelter chose profit over the due diligence that would have detected contamination in scrap metal. 3 different countries, 3 different decades, the same calculus. And the victims, Lides Neves Ferreira, age 6, who died screaming in a hospital in Brazil. Satep, who will never know if the cancer that kills him in 2014 was related to that day in the scrapyard. Mei Chang, who will spend her entire life with bone deformities and ask her parents why. They are not anomalies. They are the expected outcome of a system that treats catastrophe as statistically acceptable loss. Here's what the pattern reveals when you map it. Phase 1, the device. A machine is built, a radiotherapy unit, an industrial radiography camera, a food irradiation system. These devices contain sealed sources, capsules of radioactive material, typically cesium-137, cobalt-60, or iridium-192. The capsules are engineered to be extraordinarily durable. They're designed to survive fires, floods, impacts. They're meant to outlast the machines they're housed in by decades. This is intentional. This is good design. The problem is what happens when the machine is no longer needed. Phase 2. The end of life. A hospital closes, a clinic goes bankrupt, an industrial facility relocates. The equipment is now disused. Legally, the owner is required to 1. Report the device to national regulatory authorities. 2. Arrange for professional decommissioning by licensed specialists. 3. Ensure the radioactive source is removed, shielded and transferred to secure long-term storage. Pay for all of the above. Cost, typically $20,000 to $100,000 depending on the source and location. Alternative, walk away. Cost 0. In Goiania, the clinic owners chose the alternative. They locked the doors. They left the radiotherapy machine bolted to the floor. They filed bankruptcy paperwork that made no mention of radioactive materials. 2 years later, scavengers broke in. Phase 3. The transfer. The abandoned device enters the informal economy. Scrap workers, salvagers, and recyclers operate in a world where valuable metal is currency, and asking questions reduces profit. A heavy, well-constructed industrial device is valuable precisely because it's over-engineered. The lead shielding, that's lead, sells for $2 to $3 per kilo. The stainless steel casing, premium scrap. The fact that it's radioactive, invisible, undetectable without specialized equipment, easy to ignore. In Thailand, the hospital sold the radiotherapy machine to a salvage company for $800. The salvage company sold it to a smelter for $1,200. The smelter sold it to a scrapyard for $1,500. At each stage, the price increased. At each stage, no one checked. At each stage, someone made a profit, and then Suthep cut it open. Phase 4. The exposure. This is where the predictability becomes disturbing, because the pattern of exposure is almost identical across incidents. Furnikel, discovery by manual laborers, scrap workers, construction crews, salvagers. Furnikel, initial attraction to the object, economic value, or in the case of cesium-137, visual beauty. Furnikel, discambulant dantling, cutting, hammering, breaking the shielding. For fear, sharing the discovery with family and community, bringing it home, showing neighbors. 5. Delayed symptom onset, 12 to 72 hours before vomiting, burns, hair loss. 6D, misdiagnosis, food poisoning, viral infection, chemical burns. 7D, cluster recognition, multiple people in the same household or neighborhood become sick. 8. Specialist involvement, often by chance, a doctor who recognizes radiation syndrome, a technician who happens to have a Geiger counter. In Goiania, it took 15 days from initial exposure to official recognition. In Thailand, it took 21 days. In Taiwan, it took more than 10 years. The longer the delay, the more people are exposed. The more people are exposed, the wider the contamination spreads. And contamination spreads through the most intimate channels of human life. In Goiania, the glowing powder was passed hand to hand at a family gathering. Children played with it. Adults rubbed it on their skin like lotion. One woman, thinking it was valuable, gave some to her mother as a gift. The powder ended up in furt kitchen tables, bed sheets, children's toys, food containers, clothing, hair. When authorities finally responded, they tested more than 112,000 people. 2049 were confirmed contaminated. Of those, several had never directly touched the capsule. They'd touched someone who touched it, or sat on furniture where it had been placed, or eaten food prepared in a kitchen where dust had settled. In Thailand, the contamination spread through the scrapyard's ventilation system. Workers who never touched the cylinder still breathed in radioactive particles. Neighbors who lived downwind reported symptoms. The radiation didn't care about proximity. It didn't care about intention. It simply was. Like Taiwan, families slept in beds pressed against walls made of contaminated concrete. Children did homework at desks positioned over radioactive rebar. Pregnant women gestated babies in rooms emitting gamma radiation at levels hundreds of times above safe exposure limits. Every day, every night, for years. Phase 5. The response. Once authorities recognize the contamination, the response follows a predictable sequence. 1. Through evacuation of affected areas. 2. Medical triage, separating severely exposed from moderately exposed. 3. Decontamination, washing, discarding clothing, isolating patients. 4. Environmental remediation, removing contaminated soil, demolishing structures, securing the source. 5. Long-term monitoring, cancer screening, genetic counseling, psychological support. 6. The investigation. How did this happen? Who is responsible? How do we prevent it? And here's where the pattern breaks down. Because while the first 5 steps are relatively consistent across incidents, the 6th step, accountability, almost never happens. In Goiania, the clinic owners were never criminally charged. They declared bankruptcy. They disappeared into the legal complexity of corporate dissolution. In Thailand, the hospital that sold the machine was fined approximately $12,000. No individual was prosecuted. In Taiwan, the smelter responsible for the contamination paid civil damages to some families. The company restructured, changed names, continued operating. While the pattern reveals something uncomfortable, radiological disasters involving orphan sources are treated as accidents rather than crimes. They're framed as lapses in protocol, or regulatory oversights rather than what they actually are: the foreseeable, preventable outcome of prioritizing profit over human safety. Because everyone in the chain, from the clinic owner who abandoned the device to the scrap worker who cut it open, was making a rational economic decision based on the information and incentives available to them. The system itself is designed to produce these outcomes, and the system is global. The discovery: what connects everything? By the early 2000s, enough incidents had been documented that researchers began constructing databases. The IAEA's illicit trafficking database tracks lost, stolen, and abandoned radioactive sources. The Radiation Accident Registry, maintained by Oak Ridge Associated Universities, documents medical and occupational radiation exposures. Academic studies map the geographic and temporal distribution of orphan source incidents. And when you overlay these datasets, something emerges: a heat map, red zones, countries with high rates of radiological incidents involving civilians. The clusters aren't random. They correlate with Thailand's rapid industrialization, particularly in the 1960s, 1980s, when radiotherapy and industrial radiography expanded faster than regulatory infrastructure. 2. Economic transitions. Countries moving from planned to market economies, where state-owned hospitals and facilities were privatized or abandoned. 3. Weak regulatory enforcement. Not necessarily weak laws. Many countries have excellent radiation safety legislation, but weak enforcement due to corruption, underfunding, or lack of political will. Brazil in 1987, undergoing economic crisis, hyperinflation, weakened public health infrastructure. Thailand in 2000, post-Asian financial crisis, industrial deregulation, emphasis on economic recovery over safety oversight. Taiwan in 1982-1983, rapid construction boom, demand for cheap building materials, minimal oversight of scrap metal sourcing. 3 different contexts, the same underlying conditions, but here's the specific connection that ties these 3 cases together. They all involve teletherapy units, medical devices designed to deliver targeted radiation to cancer patients. First developed in the 1950s, widely adopted in the 1960s, 1980s, gradually replaced by newer technology, linear accelerators, proton therapy in the 1990s, 2000s. The goiania source, a cesium-137 teletherapy unit, manufactured by an Italian company, installed in 1971, abandoned in 1985. The Thailand source, a cobalt-60 teletherapy unit, manufactured in France, installed in 1982, decommissioned improperly in 1998. The Taiwan source, a cobalt-60 industrial radiography device, similar technology, different application, manufactured in the United States, decommissioned in 1981, sold as scrap in 1982. When cancer treatment meant hope, they saved thousands of lives, and then they were left behind, not destroyed, not secured, abandoned. like landmines with a 300-year fuse. Published in the Journal of Radiological Protection, attempts to quantify the global orphan source problem. The researchers estimate approximately 140,000 sealed radioactive sources were manufactured for medical and industrial use between 1950 and 2000. Of those, roughly 30% are accounted for in current regulatory databases, 20% have been properly decommissioned and secured, 50% are of unknown status. That's 70,000 devices, 70,000 potential goianias. The study's authors write, the incidents in Brazil, Thailand, Taiwan, and elsewhere are not outliers. They are sentinel events revealing a systemic problem of global scope. Every orphan source represents a probability distribution of harm that extends across decades and geographies. The question is not whether more incidents will occur, but when and where. Clinical language, precise, devastating. Because what connects Goiania, Bangkok, and Taipei isn't just the technology. It's not even the negligence. It's the fact that the same object, a healing device transformed into a weapon through abandonment, was allowed to enter civilian populations in 3 different countries, a decade apart, and kill people in almost exactly the same way. The same symptoms, the same pattern of exposure, the same delayed recognition, as if someone ran the same experiment 3 times and documented the results. Except it wasn't an experiment. It was just economics. The math is simple. Proper decommissioning of a radiotherapy unit, $50,000. Walking away, $0. Expected value of lawsuit if someone is harmed, variable, often unenforceable across jurisdictions. Expected value of criminal prosecution, historically near 0. Therefore, walking away is the rational choice. And so the devices scatter. They sit in buildings that become ruins. They're sold to scrapyards that become distribution networks for contaminated metal. They're buried in landfills that become archaeological sites of industrial negligence. And every few years someone finds one, opens it, and the blue glow appears. In 2011, a cobalt-60 source went missing in Mexico. It was found in a truck hijacked by thieves who thought they were stealing medical equipment they could resell. They opened the shielding. 6 people were hospitalized. In 2013, a cesium-137 source was discovered in a scrapyard in Thailand. A different scrapyard, a different source, the same country, the same pattern. In 2017, authorities in India found an orphaned iridium-192 source in a residential neighborhood. It had been there for 3 years. 11 people developed radiation-related illnesses. Each incident is documented. Each incident prompts regulatory review. Each incident results in recommendations for stronger oversight. And each time the same economic incentives remain. Because the problem isn't knowledge. We know how to prevent this. The problem is cost. And in the global economy, someone else's safety is always someone else's cost. The connection. 1. The object that heals and kills. Let's return to the beginning. A child's hand reaching toward light. Blue. Brilliant. Beautiful. In Goiania, that light was cesium-137, a radioactive isotope produced in nuclear reactors specifically for medical use. Cesium-137 decays by emitting beta particles and gamma rays. The gamma rays can penetrate human tissue to a depth of several centimeters, perfect for targeting tumors deep inside the body. When properly shielded and precisely aimed, cesium-137 kills cancer cells while minimizing damage to surrounding tissue. It has saved tens of thousands of lives. But cesium-137 doesn't distinguish between cancer cells and healthy cells. It doesn't distinguish between the controlled environment of a hospital and the backyard of a family in Goiania. It simply emits radiation. And when that radiation encounters human tissue, any human tissue, it ionizes atoms, breaks molecular bonds, damages DNA. The same mechanism that destroys tumors also destroys bone marrow, intestinal lining, skin cells. Lydetus Neves Ferreira absorbed approximately 6 grays of radiation, 6 times the dose typically fatal to 50% of exposed individuals. Her internal organs liquefied over 14 days because the radiation destroyed the cells lining her gastrointestinal tract faster than her body could replace them. She died from the inside out, killed by the same substance that had cured cancer in thousands of patients. The connection isn't metaphorical, it's literal. The cesium-137 that killed Leda was manufactured, transported, and installed with the intention of healing. It became a weapon only because someone decided that the cost of securing it was too high. Well, the same is true in Thailand. Cobalt-60, another medical isotope, another life-saving technology, produced in nuclear reactors by bombarding cobalt-59 with neutrons, sealed in stainless steel capsules, installed in teletherapy units across the world, used to treat breast cancer, prostate cancer, brain tumors, and then, when the machine was no longer profitable, sold as scrap, cut open in a workshop, released into the air, breathed in by Suthep and his co-workers. The same radiation that had targeted tumors with millimeter precision, now attacking healthy lungs, healthy bone marrow, healthy skin. In Taiwan, the contaminated steel that became rebar, that became the skeleton of apartment buildings, originated from the same source, a medical device, a healing tool, melted down, dispersed, woven into the infrastructure of daily life, so that families slept and ate and conceived children inside structures that were slowly irradiating them. This is the connection, not a conspiracy, not a pattern of deliberate harm, but something worse. The transformation of healing into harm through the simple mechanism of abandonment. Every radiotherapy unit, every industrial radiography device, every sealed source manufactured between 1950 and 2000 exists in a superposition. It is both a life-saving medical device and a potential mass casualty weapon. Which it becomes depends entirely on whether someone pays to keep it secure. And here's the disturbing implication. This is still happening, right now. In 2026, there are hospitals closing, clinics going bankrupt, industrial facilities being decommissioned. Some will follow proper protocols, most will, but some won't, because the incentives haven't changed. The IAEA's 2024 report on orphan sources notes, despite advances in regulatory frameworks, economic pressures continue to incentivize improper disposal of disused radioactive sources. Of particular concern are sources in countries undergoing economic crisis, armed conflict, or governmental instability, where regulatory oversight is compromised. Translation: wherever there's poverty, war, or corruption, there are orphan sources waiting to be found. And the people who will find them are predictable: scrap workers, salvagers, the economically desperate, people like Roberto Santos Alves, who just wanted to feed his family, people like Sothep, who was following his boss's orders, families like the Changs, who trusted that their new apartment was safe. They are not random victims. They are the expected casualties of a global system that treats safety as a luxury and human life as an acceptable cost of doing business. And the weapon that kills them, it's not a bomb, it's not a chemical agent, it's a medical device, a tool of healing, left behind. In Goiania, after Lady died, after the contamination was cleaned up, after the soil was removed and the buildings were demolished, someone asked, how do we make sure this never happens again? The answer was, stricter regulations, better tracking, mandatory reporting. All good ideas. None of them address the fundamental problem. Because the fundamental problem is this: we have created tens of thousands of objects that will remain deadly for 300 years. We have distributed them globally, to hospitals and clinics and industrial sites in every country on Earth. And we have made their safety dependent on continuous institutional memory, continuous funding, continuous regulatory enforcement. For 3 centuries, no institution lasts 300 years unchanged. No economic system maintains the same priorities for 300 years. No regulatory framework survives 300 years without gaps, without failures, without someone, somewhere, deciding that cutting corners is acceptable. And so the orphan sources accumulate, waiting, watching what? On September 13, 1987, Roberto Santos Alves cracked open a capsule and released light. On January 24, 2000, Suthep cut through steel and released poison. Between December 1982 and 1994, 10,000 people in Taiwan lived inside buildings that were killing them. These are not separate stories. They are chapters in a single, ongoing narrative. A narrative about what happens when we build tools more durable than our institutions. When we create dangers that outlast our ability to remember them. And the story isn't over. Because somewhere right now there's an abandoned building, and inside that building there's a machine, and inside that machine there's a capsule, and that capsule is glowing, waiting. The lasting impact, what remains. In 2026, the Goiania contamination site is still sealed, a concrete structure approximately 10 meters by 15 meters, marked with radiation trefoil symbols and warning signs in Portuguese. Inside, the topsoil from 7 properties, the demolished remains of contaminated buildings, personal possessions too radioactive to be returned to their owners. The structure is designed to last at least 300 years. Whether it will is another question. Lides Neves Ferreira's grave is still encased in lead and concrete. Her father died in 1994, cancer. Her mother died in 2001, cancer. Whether their cancers were radiation-induced is impossible to prove definitively, but the timing is suggestive. In Thailand, the scrapyard in Samut Prakan was decontaminated and eventually redeveloped. It's now a warehouse district. The workers who survived carry scars, both visible and cellular. Satep's widow received approximately $8,000 in compensation. It covered funeral costs and 1 year of rent. In Taiwan, the contaminated buildings were retrofitted or demolished between 1994 and 2003. Some families chose to stay, accepting elevated cancer risk in exchange for not losing their homes. Others relocated and spent years fighting for compensation. The average payout, $15,000 to $30,000. Not enough to buy a new apartment, enough to be insulting. Dr. Wang Wei Li, the technician who discovered the contamination, became an advocate for radiation safety. He gives talks at schools. He trains emergency responders. He keeps a Geiger counter in his car, just in case. The IAEA maintains a public database of radiological incidents. It's updated quarterly. Every update includes new orphan source discoveries, new exposures, new victims. The pattern continues. Our cesium-137 source was found in a scrapyard in Malaysia. In 2023, a cobalt-60 source was discovered in Nigeria. In 2024, authorities in Argentina located 6 orphan sources in abandoned medical facilities. Same objects, same failures, same consequences. Because the underlying incentive structure hasn't changed. Proper decommissioning is still expensive. Walking away is still free. Enforcement is still inconsistent. And the people who pay the price are still the scavengers, the workers, the families living in apartments they assume are safe. Here's what keeps radiation safety experts awake at night. Not the known orphan sources. Those at least can be tracked, located, secured. It's the unknown ones. The devices that were lost before record keeping was digitized. The sources that were buried in landfills or dumped at sea. The contaminated metal that was smelted in the 1970s and is now part of bridges, cars, surgical instruments. Because radioactive contamination doesn't announce itself. It's invisible, odorless, tasteless. You can live your entire life next to an orphan source and never know, unless you happen to bring a Geiger counter home. Unless you happen to develop cancer at 32. Unless your child is born with defects that doctors call idiopathic, cause unknown. The blue glow that fascinated Roberto and his neighbors, that's actually rare. Cesium-137 produces it because of radioluminescence. The radiation excites electrons in surrounding air molecules, causing them to emit visible light. But most radioactive sources don't glow. Cobalt-60 doesn't. Iridium-192 doesn't. They just kill, silently. And that's the final chilling realization. The Goiania incident is famous precisely because it was visible. The blue glow made it dramatic, made it photogenic, made it a story people could understand. But for every visible incident like Goiania, there are likely dozens of invisible ones. Cancers attributed to bad luck, miscarriages blamed on genetics, deaths that cluster but are never investigated because no one thinks to look for radiation. In 2018, an epidemiologist studying cancer clusters in Southeast Asia noticed something odd. Elevated leukemia rates in neighborhoods near former industrial sites. Higher than expected thyroid cancer in specific apartment complexes. Patterns that couldn't be explained by known environmental factors. She requested funding to investigate possible radiological contamination. The funding was denied. Insufficient evidence of immediate threat. One where the research never happened. The patterns remain unexplained. And somewhere, possibly, there are families living with orphan sources they'll never know about. Slowly accumulating dose, slowly developing cancers that will be diagnosed as random, as bad luck, as just one of those things. This is what the connection reveals. Goiania, Thailand, and Taiwan are not isolated tragedies. They are the visible tip of a much larger problem. A problem built into the infrastructure of modern medicine and industry. A problem that will persist for centuries because we've created objects that outlast our institutions, our memories, our willingness to pay for safety. And the most disturbing part? We knew. We've always known. The risks were documented in the 1950s when these devices were first deployed. The regulatory frameworks were designed in the 1960s. The incidents were cataloged in the 1970s. Every decade, the same warnings, the same recommendations, and every decade the same failures. Because preventing these disasters requires something modern economies are structurally bad at: long-term thinking, spending money now to prevent harm centuries in the future, treating safety as a non-negotiable cost rather than an optional expense, valuing human life over quarterly profits. In Goiania, they built a monument, a concrete marker where the contamination occurred. It says in Portuguese, "Here lies the memory of a tragedy that must never be repeated." Sincere words, empty promise. Because in 2024, 40 years after Lai died, there are still orphan sources being discovered, still scrap workers cutting open capsules, still families living in contaminated buildings. The tragedy is being repeated. It never stopped. The three stories, Goiania, Thailand, Taiwan, converge on a single truth. We have built a world where tools of healing become weapons of destruction simply through abandonment, where economic incentives predictably override human safety, where the same pattern of negligence repeats across continents and decades because the fundamental calculus hasn't changed. The blue glow that killed Laida Neves Ferreira? It was beautiful. That's what her family said. That's what all the witnesses described. Beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. A perfect metaphor for the device that created it. Technology designed to save lives, left to destroy them. And somewhere, in an abandoned clinic in a city you might live in, that same blue glow might be waiting, behind a locked door, inside a sealed capsule, inside a machine that someone decided was too expensive to properly dispose of. The connection between these stories isn't just historical, it's ongoing. The same orphan sources that killed in 1987, 2000, and throughout the 1980s-90s are still out there, decaying slowly, waiting patiently for someone to find them, for someone to open them, for the light to spill out once more. These stories were never meant to be connected, but they were, by the same object, the same failure, the same blue glow. And the next chapter is being written right now.